everybody, and welcome to You Are Badass, the presentation that is presented by the Title IX office. My name is Tiffany Street. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Assistant Director for Educational Outreach for the Title IX office.
And I'm Morgan Levy. I'm the University Title IX Coordinator, and my pronouns are also she, her, and hers.
So we are going to jump right in. Our goal today is to talk to you all about what is it to be a You Are Badass bystander, as well as go over sexual misconduct reporting options, rights, accommodations, and other important things about our policy that we want all first-year students to know about while they're coming into the University of Rochester. So real quick, we always like to start up with a heads up during this presentation. The topics that we are talking about can be emotionally challenging, difficult, upsetting, or maybe even triggering for some folks to hear. Although this is a recording, there should be the ability to pause if you need to take breaks, walk away from your computer, come back to it. We understand that this material can be a little challenging for some folks to hear about. You also could feel free to reach out to us at the end of the presentation. We are going to show our contact information throughout the presentation, as well as our email address. And we also partner with Restore Sexual Assault Services, our local sexual assault services in Monroe County in the area for the University of Rochester. And you can call them at any time. It's a 24-hour hotline to speak with a trained advocate. They will talk to anybody about sexual misconduct stuff and provide support to them. We always like to start off with, don't forget, as a new student coming to the University of Rochester, you are required to do online training, and it comes through our platform called EverFi. So EverFi will send you training into your University of Rochester email, and actually the screenshot right here is exactly what it's going to look like. So it's going to say online course assigned to you by the University of Rochester, and it's going to say you have a new assignment with your name, and then at the bottom it'll tell you what assignments are listed to you. So most of our first year students are going to get either sexual assault prevention for undergraduates if you're an undergrad student, or it'll say sexual assault prevention for graduates if you're a grad student. And alcohol EDU will also come to all of our first year undergraduates as well. These trainings will be required to be completed by October 30th. If you don't complete them by October 30th, you'll get a dreaded hold on your account, which means you won't be able to register for classes or do other things that might be University of Rochester functions. So we don't want anybody to get to that point. So make sure that when you get this training, you take the time to complete it. It will be available in mid-August to you, so you have plenty of time to get it done before that deadline. And it's going to be really beneficial training to take. And you can also pause and save and come back to it as well if you can't complete it all in one sitting. So we're going to jump right in and talk about what is considered sexual misconduct at the University of Rochester. So again, sexual misconduct is an umbrella term. There's a couple definitions that might fall under sexual misconduct. So we are going to take some time today to make sure that we go through all of them. So these are the ones that would be considered sexual misconduct here at the University of Rochester. So sexual assault. Also falling under sexual assault would be unwanted touching, either over or under clothing. We're going to talk a little bit more about that per our definition. There's also sexual harassment. And again, we're going to talk about what is sexual harassment and what are the different definitions of sexual harassment. There's also dating and domestic violence. And there's a reason that we have dating violence and domestic violence, because there are definitions that are different for both of those. And some of our college students wouldn't necessarily think that they might fall under a domestic relationship and might fall under a dating relationship. There's also stalking, and we're going to talk about that definition along with sexual exploitation and retaliation at the University of Rochester. So let Morgan jump in for sexual assault definition.
So we're going to start going through some of these definitions. We won't read word for word what's on the screen in front of you, but we want to make sure that you have a firm understanding of what types of behaviors are prohibited by our policy. So first we have sexual assault, and that is overall any actual or attempted sexual contact, however slight, with another person without that person's consent. And it includes all of those things that are listed below in the definitions in sections A through D. It includes any sexual contact without affirmative consent, and Tiff is going to talk more about exactly what affirmative consent means. It refers to things that we commonly think of as rape. So this is unwanted sexual penetration. It also includes statutory rape. In New York State, the statutory age of consent is 17 years old. So if someone is under the age of 17, they are not able to consent to sexual activity. And then it includes that touching behavior that Tiff had talked about just a moment ago. So it is intentional or unwelcome sexual touching. And then we have a definition of intimate body parts. We define those here at the University of Rochester as genital area, anus, groin, inner thigh, buttock, breast, or mouth. Those are things that we consider to be your intimate body parts.
So as Morgan mentioned, we are in New York State, and we have affirmative consent as our definition. So what does affirmative consent mean, right? So people have heard consent before, but that affirmative part adds a little different layer to it, right? So that means that we like to think of it as yes means yes. So enthusiastic, ongoing consent, right? So our yes is clear. That means that it can be expressed through words or actions. Now, this is really important to understand. Some people think it has to be just words, but it can also be actions, as long as we are able to understand that those actions are clear, right? And body language could be really hard to interpret sometimes. So we might not know if someone's giving us clear, enthusiastic consent through their body. So that's why it might be when we want to couple it with our words, asking questions like, hey, are you okay with this? And we're going to show a slide here in a minute that also shows other ways in which you can ask for consent. Again, silence is not consent, right? There might be opportunities in which my body is doing something automatically. And if I'm silent, my partner needs to be checking in with me to make sure that I am enjoying everything that's going on through all of those steps, right? So just because I might be sitting there not saying anything or not doing anything with my body does not mean that I'm giving enthusiastic consent. Consent is never implied. So just because we're dating, been in a relationship, hooked up before, etc., does not mean that there's automatic consent for that next opportunity where we may be hooking up. I need to be asking and checking with my partner every time. And again, I mentioned absence of a no is not a yes, right? So just because I'm not saying the no doesn't mean that that's a yes for me. All right. Consent is also coherent. So incapacitation by drugs or alcohol, you cannot give consent. We're going to talk a little bit later about incapacitation, what that looks like, ways in which you might see it, and why that's really challenging area in order to find out whether or not I can give or get consent from my partner. If you can't determine the who, what, where, when, or how in a situation, you cannot consent. And really important to talk about, if someone's sleeping, that they cannot give consent, right? So incapacitation can also be if my partner is sleeping or so sleep deprived that they are unable to give consent. We talked about the willing. It's not obtained through manipulation or physical or violent threats, so no coercion. And coercion is also part of our affirmative consent definition here in New York State. And again, it's never given under pressure. So if I'm pressuring my partner after they've said no 10 times, and they finally say yes, right, it doesn't negate the 10 times that they said no prior to that. And as I mentioned, consent is ongoing, so it must be granted every time. And consent to one activity does not mean consent to every activity. So just because I'm making out with somebody and now I want to take the next step and I want to take off their shirt, if I don't ask or check in, that's not me getting consent from that person. So how are ways in which we can ask them for consent, right? I've talked about it, and this might be a little awkward for people to hear, right? We get a little good chuckle out of this one, but that's okay, because this is really important to talk about. How can I give consent or ask for consent for my partner? Really easy. We're literally asking questions, right? We do this all the time as human beings. We're asking questions to make sure that that person is comfortable with what we're going to do. And before I touch anybody's body, I'm asking if it's okay to do that. So that's real easy, right? Are you okay with this? Can I touch you here? May I take off your shirt? Can I kiss you? Do you like this? Again, if I change my mind, we'll stop. These are ways in which I can answer my partner and say, I'm good with this right now. And if there's something, I'll let you know. Okay. Does this feel good? Right? Use your own words. It could be in your own language. Just make sure that you're asking these questions and checking with your partner. Okay. I always say if I'm making out with a partner and I want to go take their shirt off and they're literally already taking their shirt off for me, they're giving consent by using that action. Okay. And consent is a skill. So this is a skill that, again, the more that you practice, the better you're going to get at it. But it is a requirement when you come here at the University of Rochester that you know what affirmative consent is, that you are required to get it from your partner or whoever you're hooking up with each and every time. So some other important things to think about when we're talking about consent, because we love consent. We want to create consent culture here at the University of Rochester, and we want you all to come in with these skills right when you get here. So it's really important that we're talking about respecting someone's answer, right? I talked about the consent is ongoing piece, but that means that you should be continually checking in with your partner about their comfort, desires, and their boundaries, right? We all have boundaries. We're going to talk a little bit more about boundaries when we get to healthy and unhealthy relationships. Again, this is really easy. Just asking questions, checking in about what does that person like, and respecting them if they tell me that they don't like something. That's really important. And again, consent is revocable. So just because I got it for one action doesn't mean I have it for every action. So even if someone was unsure that they wanted to, that they love the person that they're hooking up with, you know, they may want it yesterday, does not necessarily mean that they want it today. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the hearing no, okay? Because hearing no is hard. That's hard for anybody that's rejection. It feels automatic. It might trigger an automatic response in our body, okay? But it's very important about how we respond to that no when somebody might give it to us. And it's okay to feel bummed, rejected, or confused, but there's some steps that we should take along the way if we do receive a no from somebody. right? So we should stop that action immediately. So we shouldn't do anything further, and we got to make sure everybody's safe in that situation. This is a great opportunity then where we check in. How can I make you more comfortable right now? And that person might say, I don't want to do anything else. And we have to say, okay, I respect that answer. Make sure you listen. Don't jump to your own defense, right? I know this is going to be really hard for some people. This is a good place to work on that if that's something that your body might do automatically. If you need to, this might be an opportunity where you might want to give yourself some time, sit quietly, take some space if needed, and reflect on the experience, right? How did it make you feel? And what could have made it better? And sometimes we're going to get no from our partners, and we have to be okay with that. And that might just be the way that they feel that day. But the better that we get at hearing this word no, the better our experiences are going to be with our partners in the future. So let Morgan jump in about what does incapacitation look like?
Yeah, so as Tiff mentioned, people cannot give consent if they are incapacitated. And I think often when we think about incapacitation, we think about someone being drunk. They drank too much alcohol and therefore they're passed out. And that's true. Being drunk due to the ingestion of alcohol is one of the ways where someone can be incapacitated, but you can also be incapacitated because someone's asleep. You could be incapacitated because you're being involuntarily restrained. You also could be incapacitated because of using drugs other than alcohol. And they could be legal or illegal drugs. It doesn't necessarily have to just refer to things that we would consider to be illegal drugs. And some of the signs of what incapacitation can look like are things like, you know, a person not being really aware of what their circumstances are, them being confused or incoherent. Certainly if someone's unconscious or vomiting, that is a really good sign that they're incapacitated and are not going to be able to consent to any type of sexual behavior. If someone doesn't have control of their physical movements, they're stumbling, they're falling. Those are the types of things that we should be noticing are signs of incapacitation. And so
Go ahead, Morgan.
So at the University of Rochester, when we have a complaint that's brought forward where someone says, I was incapacitated and I was not able to consent to sexual activity, the university uses a standard of what a reasonable, sober person in the same position should have known about that person's capacity to consent to sexual activity. So it is your responsibility to understand whether or not the person you're trying to engage in sexual activity with has the capacity to consent. So we need to be looking for those signs that someone might be a bit intoxicated. They might not be able to consent to activity.
So when it comes to sex, I get asked these questions a lot as an educator, right? How much alcohol does someone need to drink to be considered incapacitated? And this is one of those loaded questions. And we ask this question on purpose because incapacitation is a tricky term. It's used under New York state law, our policy, and it is rarely defined in similar ways. And that's because everybody reacts to alcohol differently. And this could be due to so many factors, okay? So me as a woman who's only 5'2", depending on how much I ate that day. Did I eat 10 slices of pizza before I went out, or did I eat a salad, right? Did I drink water throughout the day, as a good human should hydrate their body, or did I drink 18 Red Bulls, okay? All these things are gonna play factor into how my body is gonna react to alcohol if I go out and I ingest that, or other drugs, okay? The most important part is understanding that this is fluid and this could change. So I could go out one night and drink 5 Jenny Lights, all right? And then the next night I could drink 5 Jenny Lights and my body could react quite differently to that. There is no set standard for how my body is going to ingest alcohol. It depends on all of those factors I had mentioned. How much sleep I got the night before. So if you're a college student, you've only got 4 hours of sleep and you go out, you drink, it may affect you differently than if you got 8 hours of restful sleep and went out and consumed the same amount of alcohol. So the most important thing to remember about, and we talked about this with consent, is that you have to be able to communicate effectively. And that when you drink alcohol or take other drugs, that can really impede decision making. And if you're hooking up with someone who's incoherent or doesn't seem to know what's going on, that's when you kind of take that time out and say, hey, we need to pause. We're both not in a place to do this, and check in the next day. The other question that I get asked a lot is all sexual contact considered sexual assault if alcohol is involved? And the answer is no. It is possible for people to have positive consensual sexual experiences after drinking. But here's where there's a big difference, right? When it comes to how much alcohol is that line. And again, I can't give you a clear answer to that. This is where you have to understand and know if someone's drank too much or have taken a drug that make them seem incapacitated. it may add an extra layer of risk to a sexual encounter, specifically if you don't know that person well. If you're best friends with me and we go out, you might know how I communicate. And you might know specifically when I'm having a night where I am far too drunk to be able to give consent. But if you don't know that person very well, or you met them that night, or they're an acquaintance, how do you know how they usually communicate? And so there is a very clear line between being able to have consensual sex after a couple drinks versus somebody being drunk or incapacitated and not able to give consent. Again, this is an area where we ask a lot for our students to know where that area is, because you have to understand when and where you can give consent, specifically when alcohol or other drugs is involved.
Okay, so this is a really, really, really important point. So I hope if you only take a couple things away from our conversation today, this is one of them, and that is that the University of Rochester has a medical amnesty policy. We really, really want people to come forward and seek help if they have had an experience or they have witnessed or heard about someone else's experience where they've encountered sexual misconduct. We want you to be able to come forward, make a report if that's what you want to do, get the help, get connection to resources. And so we've learned that a lot of college students are very concerned about potential disciplinary consequences of consuming alcohol or other drugs. And we want to make sure that people know that when it comes to issues of sexual misconduct, we care much more about making sure that we're addressing that behavior of sexual misconduct than we do about holding people accountable for an alcohol or other drug policy violation. So an individual or bystander who's acting in good faith or someone who's reporting that it happened will not have to worry about disciplinary consequences for using substances. So if you're wasted, you're drunk, you've drank way, way too much, and you witnessed someone engaging in unwanted sexual behavior with someone else, we really want you to come forward. Nobody is going to say, okay, thanks for telling us that information, and now let me write you up for violating the alcohol policy. Same thing with your personal use of other drugs. If someone smoked pot and they then witnessed an incident of sexual misconduct or experienced an incident of sexual misconduct, the university really will not care about that minor drug policy violation. We care much more about the potential sexual misconduct that occurred. So please, please, please keep that in the back of your mind, that we want you to get help more than anything else. This policy also applies not just to issues of sexual misconduct, but other issues as well. So if someone is intoxicated and really needs to get help, they really need to have someone come from public safety and evaluate whether or not they need to go to the hospital. Someone's own personal use of alcohol is not going to be brought up in that process. All right, so now we're going to talk about a couple of definitions. Again, I'm not going to read through all of these. We have a lot of definitions that we have to share with you. So these two are the general definitions of sexual harassment and gender-based harassment. So sexual harassment is unwanted, verbal, visual, written, electronic, or physical conduct of a sexual nature that is intended to cause or could be expected to cause someone to feel fearful, abused, concerned for their safety because of their sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, expression. And then gender-based harassment is a subset of sexual harassment. So that's harassment on the basis of someone's self-identified or perceived gender identity or gender expression. And then there's a couple different types of sexual harassment. So there's hostile environment harassment. This is when essentially there's unwanted sexual behavior that is sufficiently severe and pervasive, and it has the effect of interfering with someone's equal access to their education or creates a really untenable work or academic environment. And then there's quid pro quo harassment, which really does not come up that often anymore. Quid pro quo harassment is when someone essentially says you have to do something in order to get a benefit. So, for example, it would be if there was a faculty member who said, if you want to get an A in this class, you have to go out on a date with me. That would qualify as quid pro quo harassment. It also could be in the student context of a student leader saying, if you want to join my organization, we'd love to have you as long as you go on a date with my friend. That type of behavior is clearly prohibited at the university and thankfully is not something that we see that often.
So we always like to show a visual for our visual learners, for people who may want to know, well, how does sexual harassment like manifest, and what are the ways in which I might see it? Okay, so this might be some ways in which you might see sexual harassment. Our policy really delves into a lot of the other ways in which sexual harassment might manifest, but some of these might be degrading jokes or comments about your appearance or sexual history or preferences, anything to like that makes somebody feel uncomfortable. Invalidating one's identity, so gender expression or identity, and someone makes comments about that or invalidates that, or intentionally says, no, that's not, you identify as this over here, right? Spreading rumors about sexual past. There's no place in which we need to talk about people's sexual past, especially in a work setting. Intrusive questions. What did you do on Friday night? Who'd you go out with? Did you dance with anybody? Did you drink this? Et cetera, et cetera. Those things can make people feel really uncomfortable. Definitely sharing inappropriate images. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that could potentially be sexual harassment or sexual exploitation. And unwanted flirting. If I said no and it continues, like Morgan had mentioned, continued comments about go out on a date with me, come on, go out on a date with me, I'll take you out, we'll have a fun time, et cetera, et cetera. And you've made it very clear that you're no longer interested in those flirtations, or they just continue to happen, making someone very uncomfortable. These are ways in which we might see sexual harassment manifest.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about dating violence or abuse. So dating violence is violence that has been committed by someone who's in a social relationship that is of a romantic, sexual, or intimate nature. And for our purposes, we really let the students define whether their relationship is a sexual or intimate relationship. It's really the type of interaction that people have said, and someone can clearly help articulate why their relationship is a dating relationship. You don't have to live together. You don't have to have a formalized title in order to fall into the category of a dating relationship for the purposes of this policy. And it's also important to know that we're not just talking about, when we talk about dating violence or abuse, we're not just talking about physical abuse. So often people think about dating violence as someone hitting another person and physically injuring them. And that definitely would fall under that definition of dating violence, but it doesn't have to be physical. It could also be emotional violence. And we've had a number of complaints that we've addressed through our process where someone's been able to really demonstrate that they were in a controlling and emotionally abusive relationship. And they've been found responsible under that policy. So domestic violence is very similar to dating violence, but it is a little bit more restrictive in terms of who it applies to. So it is violence that is categorized as a felony or misdemeanor in New York State, and it is between members of the same family or household. So this is what I think most people think of when they think about domestic violence or dating violence. It's people who are married or formerly married, they have a child in common, they've been in an intimate relationship for a long period of time. And so here's some of the examples of behaviors that fall under our dating and domestic violence policy. So it is certainly physical violence that can cause injury. It is engaging in behaviors that would create a fear of injury or property damage. So even if someone doesn't actually damage property or doesn't actually injure someone, if they engage in this type of abuse where someone has a really reasonable fear that that's going to happen, that would fall under the definition of dating and domestic violence. It is repeated communications through any means when someone's doing it with the intent to try to really scare their partner.
So we talked about some of those differences between dating and domestic violence. And again, for our visual learners, I want to talk about what are ways in which we might see that manifest. So in the era of social media and technology right at our fingertips, we see this coupled sometimes with dating violence, is that our partner might be blowing up our phone, texting us just horrific messages, tons and tons and tons of messages, right? Might be in class and I come back to my phone, I've got 45 messages. Where are you? Who are you with? Why were you out that late? They seem to be very controlling, right? These are the ways in which these are tactics that a partner might use to control in a relationship. And there are some staggering statistics about the rise and the use of technology and how that plays into healthy and unhealthy relationships. And there's a statistic there at the bottom of the screen talking about how many folks have given passwords to partners or how many partners have asked for passwords to phones. to go through and look in private information, right? I always do this if I'm in person with you. I'd ask somebody in the audience, who wants to hand me their phone, unlock it, and give me the keys to the kingdom? And there's not usually somebody that volunteers for that. And there's a reason for that. There's information on there that is your information, and you want to keep it private. And so if a partner is threatening or asking you or going into your phone, that could be another way in which they're utilizing that as a control tactic. So I want to talk a little bit about what are unhealthy relationships. This is really important that we talk about this as our incoming first-year students and incoming graduate students. Unhealthy relationships are really important because we see that a lot of our students have dealt with unhealthy relationships already. And y'all are coming in and you might be ages 17 to 30, and that's a really young time of your life to have already experienced an unhealthy relationship. So we really want to talk a lot about this and make sure that folks are feeling comfortable being able to identify these and have some skills if something does happen. So there are different types of violence, as Morgan had talked about. There could be physical violence, which could manifest, but a lot of times there are other things that have manifested first before we see physical. Usually that's that psychological or emotional damage that you'll see first. There could be financial abuse. Financial we don't talk a lot about, but it's really important to talk about. If you have a partner that controls your finances, you have a joint bank account, and they monitor all of your spending, or they only allow you a certain amount of money. On the reverse, it could be a partner that says, take me out for dinner, and they expect you to pay for every instance that you go out for dinner, or they expect you to pay for all of their belongings. Verbal also can be coupled with that psychological and emotional. Sexual abuse absolutely can happen in a dating relationship, as I talked about earlier with consent. Consent doesn't just go out the window the second you start dating somebody or hooking up with somebody. And just because you're married or may have been in a long-term relationship, you always have to get consent from your partner. Digital violence, as I mentioned, with the text messages and the online stalking, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about stalking as well. Stalking from a partner, imagine your partner knows everything about you. That's really scary if they utilize that as controlling behavior to figure out where you're at, where you're going, who you've been with, all those kind of things. There's also spiritual or cultural abuse. So if you are religious or practice of faith and your partner prohibits you from doing things that are important to you, like praying or fasting or going to a church or a chapel or a mosque, those things could be another way in which they control. And as Morgan had mentioned, damage to property. So if I take your cell phone and I'm pissed that you texted somebody and I smash it on the ground, that's ways in which I'm controlling you. So again, I always like to show visuals. How does this look like when I start to get into an unhealthy relationship? Because it doesn't just, jump off. There's usually a cycle of abuse. So we usually start in the good phase, right? The honeymoon phase. And everyone has a honeymoon phase. And it really depends on how long your honeymoon phase lasts. Some people, it's 2 weeks, 5 years, 18 years, 1 day, okay? But everyone has a honeymoon phase. That's that good phase where we start out with the good stuff, the affection, the helpful comments, the support. And this is a really important phase, and we'll explain a little bit more why when we start to go through the cycle, all right? And then we go into that tension building. So this is when our partner starts to criticize us or threaten us or, gaslight us. And I'll show you what gaslighting looks like. If some of you have not heard of that, that's a term that's becoming a little bit more relevant now. And mind games or using that emotional abuse. And then it goes into that explosion phase. And the explosion phase is really scary, right? Because that could be physical violence, it could be sexual, or it could be that emotional abuse. It could be the partner blowing up, calling me all sorts of terrible names, making me feel just really small and insignificant. And then the other big piece of this cycle of abuse is the remorse phase. And I always say, why is this remorse phase so important? And that's because your partner is coming back and apologizing or making these promises that they're not going to do this again. And that almost solidifies us back into that honeymoon phase or that wishful phase where we're really hoping we're finally going to see something good come from our partner. And that's going to be that reminiscent of the good stuff. That's why the remorse and the honeymoon phases are really important in a cycle of abuse, because if you're thinking more about all of the good times that used to happen than all the good times that are currently happening, we should probably wave in that red flag and be on the lookout for some of those warning signs. So what are some of those warning signs? As Morgan mentioned, I'm not going to read them all. You can see them on the screen. I think that there are some important ones to mention. Again, some of that isolating from family and friends. This is really important, and it might look a little bit more challenging to be able to notice this if we go into kind of a remote world where we might be doing some of our classwork online or we're not able to see as many friends due to the pandemic. But keeping an eye on people who used to be really involved in family and friends, and then all of a sudden they're no longer hanging out with those family or friends, or they make comments like, oh, well, so-and-so said that I can't hang out with you anymore. Those might be things in which we might want to really keep an eye on that red flag, right? Because that's a good way in which a partner can control another partner by taking them away from people that they feel safe around. Constant put downs. I talk about this all the time. Could you imagine the person that's supposed to love and cherish you and support you the most is telling you all of the most horrific things about yourself? What's going to happen? Over time, you're going to start to believe those things. So you're going to start to believe that you're stupid, or you're a piece of garbage, or that you're X, Y, and Z, because your partner is saying those things to you all the time. They blame you for all of their negative, all the bad things that happen in their life. They blame it on you. Also, I really want to mention that they threaten violence or suicide. We talked a little bit about that with the definitions of emotional violence. If they say, if you ever leave me, I'm going to kill myself. These are ways in which our partner is trying to keep us in this control tactic, because they don't want you to have that guilt of, if somebody was to really hurt themselves, my partner's really to hurt myself, if I left, that's that guilt. It keeps me in that unhealthy relationship. So other ways in which this might look, we talked about the digital violence, getting your phone blown up, right, from your partner. Could you imagine you're taking a test and your phone is just absolutely blowing up? It's going to cause you stress and anxiety. You're not going to do as well on that test, right? We don't want our grades to suffer because our partner is controlling us through our text messages. So I talked a little bit about what does gaslighting look like. Here are some of the ways in which we might see gaslighting. So gaslighting, just basically you come to your partner with a legitimate comment or a legitimate complaint. Hey, we're not spending enough time together. How do you feel about that? And they flip it on you, right? Or you say, hey, I've noticed that you're doing this thing. It's making me uncomfortable. And they say, well, why are you being so sensitive? Or I didn't say that. You're lying. Okay, you're the problem, not me. All these things are ways in which we might gaslight a partner. If we're, talking about our mental health and we're talking about a legitimate concern with our partner, and every time we bring something up, they use that as like a weapon to say, oh, that's just your mental illness, right? Or you need to take your meds. These are ways in which we might see gaslighting. And a really simple way to put it, if this is you over here in the pink and you're doing more than 50% of the work in your relationship, you might want to take a time to think, is this relationship really healthy? If I'm doing about 75, 80% of the work in this relationship, my partner's not meeting me halfway. I always think it's important to talk about what common excuses for violence might look like. It's one thing for me to say them. It might be another thing for you all to see them on the screen. So I'm just going to give a little bit of time. If somebody is using these when they talk with you, that might be, these big flashing warning sign here on the screen to think about if your partner's making these comments. All right, phew, we made it. We're going to get through all that stuff and onto the good stuff. So I always like to talk about, let's see now what a happy, healthy relationship looks like, right? And these are the good things. These are the things that make us feel safe and equal in our relationship with our partner. We have open communication, mutual respect, right? Love is respect. That is key. If I'm treating my partner with the love and respect that they deserve, I'm going to get that in return, hopefully. There's no non-threatening behavior, right? I feel safe with my partner. At all times, they have my back. We are each other's support system. There's shared responsibility. And I always say, being able to be yourself, right? Everybody loves to be weird. And when you find that good partner, you're able to be equally weird together, because you're not trying to put on a facade. You're not trying to pretend like there's something there. And that's not really who you are when you wake up in your pajamas and you're eating cereal in front of the TV and you want to be weird with your partner, right? And they're right along there next to you, just enjoying that moment with you. It's also very important to remember that you have relationship rights, and these are really important. So if something's happening and you need to break off a relationship, you have the right to end a relationship without fear or guilt. You have the right to change your mind. You have the right to choose when and if you will have sex with somebody and who you have sex with. All of these things. You have the right to feel safe and respected. And I'll let Morgan jump in about how can you help a friend if you see that they may be going through an unhealthy relationship?
Yeah, and I think that this can be really, really hard. Oftentimes that we have the best intentions with our friends, and we may think we know best exactly. We may know the best next step for our friend in terms of how to make their relationship better, but they may not actually want you to give them a roadmap for how to break up with their partner or how to make it better. So here's some tips for how you might be able to help a friend who's in an unhealthy relationship. So first, talk to them, listen to them, ask them how they're doing, encourage them, support them, tell them that you're there if they need you. And I think it's really important to focus on the listening piece of it. So they are the people who are in that relationship. They know everything about their relationship, how it's unfolded. They are the people who are the expert in their own relationship. And if they've come to you, if they're trusting you enough to share some challenges that they're having in their relationship, they're not coming to you because they see you as someone who's going to fix the problem. They're coming to you because they're seeing you as someone who's going to be able to support them. And the best way you can support them is being that ear for them. Make sure that you keep it focused on them, that it's really about your friends and not the other party that's involved in the relationship. I've certainly seen a couple of friendships over the course of my career in my life where someone's been really direct about how much they hate their friend's partner and just what a terrible person they think their friend's partner is. And then their friend stays with their partner and they now no longer have a relationship with them. And so instead of helping their friend and being there and supporting them, they've now eliminated one more pair of listening ears from that person who's in the unhealthy relationship's life. Definitely do not contact the person who you are perceiving as your friend's abuser. It really can put that person in danger. And again, I think most people act in ways that they think are going to be beneficial. Everyone has good intentions. In cases of dating and domestic violence, if you were to approach the person who you believe is the abuser, it really could escalate it to a much more dangerous place than it was before. I think that one of the most dangerous times in a relationship that has had dating and domestic violence characteristics to it is when someone is deciding to leave. And it's really important that if someone has recognized those signs of an unhealthy or dangerous relationship and they're starting to put the pieces together, that they have the time and space they need so that they can leave that relationship in a safe manner. So if you try to intercede and kind of let that partner know just how terrible you think that they are, you might be eliminating that option from your friend's life.
So we're going to move on to You Are Is Badass. So not only do you get to tell your friends that I go to a school where they get to say that I'm badass, but there's a reason why we get to say You Are Is Badass. Our program here, Badass Bystander, is actually an acronym, and it is a really cool acronym because we get to walk around with our badass shirts and talk about why we're so proud to call ourselves Badass Bystanders. And that's because we are being aware, deciding to act, and saying something. And I'm going to go through what is bystander intervention. And this might be new for some folks. It may be not new for some folks, but we're going to talk about what it means to really be a badass bystander here at the University of Rochester and wherever you are across the world. So when we're talking about intervening, what is it? What's the basic concept of it? And this is, we speak out against statements, attitudes, or behavior that might perpetuate a culture that endorses violence as acceptable or inevitable. So this could be rape culture, this could be victim blaming, this could be racism, this could be sexism, this could be a whole bunch of those negative things that create inequality in our community. And we're saying that's not cool, all right? We're basically just trying to name and stop any of those situations that could lead to an undesirable outcome. And this might not always have to be an action that's occurring, but it could be words, because words could still create an undesirable outcome for somebody. If it is a situation where we're stepping in during a high-risk incident, or like I said, maybe a low-risk incident where somebody's making a comment, you could use disruption, distraction, speaking up, or even calling on help for others. And we're going to show you what those steps look like. And most importantly, supporting and helping others respond to problematic situations. Believe others when they feel uncomfortable or hurt. Like Morgan had just mentioned, it is our job to believe our friends when they come up to us and tell us, somebody said or did this thing, and I felt hurt by it. And our job is to say, I believe you, and what can I do to help you? So we talk about what are those badass bystander moves. So over here, it's called the 5 Ds. We could also say the 4 Ds. I like to combine document and delay into a 1 D just to make it a little easier. But here are 4 Ds of bystander intervention. So what does it look like? Direct. So we are directly confronting the situation. We are being firm, clear, and concise on that. And I'm going to show you some examples of what direct looks like. Distract. So this is exactly what it sounds like. We are taking an indirect approach to de-escalate the situation. We're basically inserting ourselves to move the focus off of what is currently happening and move it into something else. Delegate. We're looking to seek help from a third party. And again, this doesn't have to necessarily be somebody in a power or authority position. It could be somebody who knows the other parties that are involved. That could be a mutual friend. It could be somebody else that we think is in a better position to be able to take other steps to help. And as I mentioned, document and delay. So document if it's safe to do so. And I think that this is happening across the country as we are currently seeing phones and people recording incidences. Even if I go out and I'm just recording something on Snapchat, it's very likely I could catch something in the background. And that's really important document that we have. We might use that as a piece of evidence in a case if it moves forward. So it may not be a bad thing if somebody was to document something happening. Only if it's safe to do so, I always say. And then delay. This is something that you can do as coupled with one of the other Ds, or something that you might do if it's like an unhealthy relationship. You're checking in with the person being harassed, right? So maybe you saw an explosion of a relationship happening, and at the time, it's not right to step in right then and there. But that's what Morgan talked about earlier, where you pull your friend aside and say, hey, I saw that happen to you, and I just was really worried about you, and I just want to check in to see how you're doing. So some of the other examples, like I talked about with direct, okay, this is simply going right to the point, okay? That's inappropriate, disrespectful, not okay. It's not a funny joke, not a cool thing to say. Leave them alone. But you also could turn your direction to the person that's receiving the harm as well. Hey, are you okay? Can I help you? Would you like me to stay with you? It doesn't have to always be directing your attention to the person causing the harm, because that might be a situation in which it might become unsafe for you as well. So you might want to direct your attention to the person that's receiving the harm and check in with them. Say, hey, are you okay? What can I do to help you right now? Distract is one of my favorite techniques. I think people feel comfortable utilizing this, especially if you got a little bit of humor or comedy. You might be able to interject with your friends like, hey, let's get pizza. I'm starving. Let's go somewhere else. I always, if I was in person with you all, would literally pull my phone out right now and just hand it to a random person and say, oh my gosh, can you take a picture of me and my friends? You know, you might huff and go, oh, yeah, I'll do it. But it's a really great way to distract folks from what's happening. You're basically saying, hey, take a picture of me. And they now have to turn their attention to doing that action. Where's the bathroom? Grabbing your friends, having a bathroom party to get somebody out of that situation, pulling somebody, hey, oh my gosh, my favorite song's on, let's go dance. Or one of my favorite techniques to use as well is, look over there, I thought I just saw, insert your favorite celebrity that you think is going to cause a ruckus, maybe clear out a whole crowd of people. Because if somebody thinks that there's a celebrity, they might try to go get a picture, or it might distract somebody's attention, right? On to delegate. So again, I talked about you don't have to always use an authority figure for this. If it feels like it might be a situation where somebody's in immediate violence or harm situation, you may want to call public safety or another official to handle that. If you're at a party, you might want to ask the host of a party to intervene, or maybe somebody knows those parties. You can go get help from them. Again, a bouncer, a bartender, or another friend group. You might say, hey, this person over here is looking really uncomfortable. I think they came in with this group over here. And you might just want to go tag that group in and say, hey, can you check in on your friend? Looks like they're in an uncomfortable situation. And as I mentioned with delay, you're just asking if they're okay, tell them you're sorry that happened to them, what ways that you can support them. The most important thing, if they're willing and would like it, you can share resources with them and offer to help them make a report if that's the next step that they want to take. And as I had mentioned earlier, if you did document the incident, you can ask if you'd like to send it to them so that they have that for the future if they'd like to use it.
All right, so now we're going to talk again about some definitions. So stalking. Stalking is conduct of a sexual or romantic nature that's directed at someone that would cause them to fear for their health or safety, or the health or safety of someone they're close to, like a friend or a family member, or to have them suffer substantial emotional abuse. As Tiff mentioned earlier, the advent of so many ways to keep in touch electronically does pose some challenges at times, and certainly in the stalking area, that is one of them. So we have seen situations where someone has certainly physically followed someone or sort of shown up outside their classes, or they just happen to be everywhere that person is. Like, I went to go play tennis and Joe was there, and then I went to the dining hall and then Joe was there, and then I went back to my residence hall and Joe was there. In those situations, if someone's being really transparent in their social media, it may be making it a little bit easier for someone to connect with them. Like if you check into every single place you go to around campus, that is something just to think about. It could be inviting some unwelcome conduct. So stalking, again, I'm not going to read through all of these things, but it's not just the sort of following or showing up uninvited. It also could be getting information from family and friends. So if you are friendly with someone, then all of a sudden they're reaching out to your mom and they're reaching out to your sister, and they're Facebook friends with every single person who you have encountered. And they're trying to just seek information about, you know, how you're doing or where you are. That might fall into that category of stalking.
So again, I kind of showed these similar type images. We talked about dating domestic violence, and sometimes dating domestic violence, as I mentioned, there could be instances where there's also stalking behavior. Sometimes we see those go hand in hand, not all the time, but sometimes. So if all of a sudden my phone is blowing up like this with a no caller ID because there's somebody that I blocked and now they're trying to spoof their phone number, and spoofing is basically a way in which I can insert my real phone number and have it look like I'm coming from any phone number that I desire. So there's a way in which you pick up your phone and end up talking to me even though you've blocked me, maybe in other different places. Or as Morgan had mentioned, I'm texting my friend saying, hey, this is really creepy. Like, Joey is everywhere since we broke up. Like, I don't know how he knows where my classes are, when I go to eat, or I have a really, different schedule, but he seems to always be there. And again, some people think like, oh, stalking, here are some of the things that it might be. All these things are definite stalking definitions. So it's not just harmless or romantic to show up or be leaving gifts or things if somebody has definitely said, no, thank you, I do not want it. So just things to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, and I feel like we just really need to believe people when they say, I don't really want to have anything to do with you. The very first time someone tells you, no, I'm good, I don't want to date you anymore, or I don't want to date you in the first place, I'm not interested in a relationship, that's it. That's the end of the conversation. There's no there shouldn't be any attempts to convince someone to date you, to try to, you don't want to be in a relationship with someone that you've forced to be in that relationship through a campaign of gift giving or persuasion with their family or friends.
As we said the one time, and I thought it was such a great comment, is you are a worthy human being, and you don't just want to say, oh, I give up. You've tried to pursue me for so long, and I've said no. I finally just cave in to your pursuance. That is definitely frightening stuff.
Yeah, and just a creepy, not good relationship in general. So this is the definition of sexual exploitation. So sexual exploitation is a fancy name for behavior that you probably already know about. So it's when someone takes non-consensual sexual advantage of another person for their benefit or another party. The things that we typically see at the university that fall in this sexual exploitation category are things like someone has a picture of their partner or of someone that they hooked up with once, and maybe they got that picture through a consensual conversation where they said, hey, can I take this picture? And the person said yes. Or maybe they took the picture when someone was sleeping, and it was right after they hooked up and the person didn't necessarily have the opportunity to give consent for that picture being taken. And then they keep that picture for their own benefit, or they share that picture with other people. That is definitely an example of sexual exploitation. You really need to make sure that if you have any sort of images, video, audio, anything like that of another person, that first of all, that your possession of it is done with their knowledge, and that if there's any sort of distribution of that, it is with the consent of the person who is shown or is speaking in that recording or documents. Another example of sexual exploitation is exposing someone's genitals in a non-consensual circumstance. So we have had circumstances where there's been folks on our campus who have just decided that everyone wants to see their private parts. That's not actually the case, and in those situations that would be an example of sexual exploitation. Knowingly infecting someone with an STI without informing the other person, that is also an example of sexual exploitation. If you have a sexually transmitted infection, that is something you need to be transparent about with your partner so that they can take the steps that they need to take to either continue to engage in that sexual encounter in a safe way or decline to engage in that sexual encounter because they are not willing to risk getting that infection themselves.
Again, I always like to show some visuals after our policy information. So as Morgan had mentioned it, please don't send unwanted dick pics. I always like to say unwanted vagina pics. It's just not the reality in which we're seeing, but that's a way in which you might see sexual exploitation. Or again, as Morgan had mentioned, I send you, a photo and then you take a screenshot without my consent. That's other ways in which we might see sexual exploitation. Again, ask before you send. Consent still applies to sexting, still applies to nude photos or videos or images. And most importantly, if we're no longer hooking up or we're no longer in a relationship, please have the respect and maturity to delete those images, get those things off your phone, and don't hold on to them, because revenge porn is terrible. And again, it's not about revenge or porn, it's about consent and control. And we want to make sure that those people feel safe knowing that their images are not going to pop up somewhere and utilized as some terrible control tactic.
And I do also want to mention that revenge porn is not only prohibited by the University of Rochester's policies, it's also prohibited by New York state law. And so there can be really significant consequences. The only last thing I want to say about those things is that it is important for all of us to be very thoughtful about the types of information that we want to put out there in the world. And we have no judgment whatsoever. If someone wants to send pictures of themselves nude or you know, in a sexual situation and you fully consent to that, great, you do it. That's entirely your right, and no one would judge you for it. It is really difficult to control what someone might do once they obtain those images, though. And we've certainly seen situations where someone 4 years later, 3 years later, has used the imagery that they had obtained consensually for purposes that were not intended for them to be used. So just sort of keep that in the back of your mind when you're making those choices about what you want to share with others. And then, oh, there's one last piece. Sorry, I forgot about that. So there's, we also every year get a number of complaints, unfortunately, about a particular type of sexual exploitation where someone decides to befriend typically an international student on social media, and they become friendly with them. They become friends with their other friends and family on social media and convince the person, typically one of our students, to engage in some sexual behavior in front of a camera. And as soon as they complete that sexual behavior in front of the camera, the individual will say, okay, now I have this video recording of you engaging in this sexual behavior, and if you don't pay me X amount of money, sometimes it's $500, sometimes it's $10,000, then I'm going to share it with all of your friends and family, because now I've become friends with them through our social media connection, or your university professors, university leadership. So I would again encourage people to be very, very thoughtful about how much they know about a person who's requesting that type of information from them, because we have certainly seen situations where someone has taken advantage of one of our students in that way.
I just want to throw in real quick, just in the world of using Zoom and where everything's going remotely, understand that we are going to be on cameras with each other a lot more frequently. And just like right now, we are recording this webinar, but there may be folks that didn't know that. And if they were to watch it live, understand that it's the same kind of situation. If I was to expose something very private to a person that I had just kind of met via technology, it's very likely that they could have a way on their back end that they are recording that and utilizing that for their personal gain. So just be really cautious about those situations and understand that everything can be recorded, and just, safety is paramount. Again, real quick, I know that Morgan had mentioned, how do I help a friend with unhealthy relationships? We want to talk about, just in general, if someone disclosed any of the above things that we've talked about in policy definitions, if anybody has disclosed any instances of sex or gender-based misconduct, what do I say to them? I want to be able to say the right thing, right? I don't want to minimize that experience or victim blame them or make it seem like I don't care. My goal is to say that I do care about the information that you're sharing with me. And so again, after you really sit down and you listen quite a lot, and these are just really easy statements that you can say to somebody to make them feel validated, to make them feel like you care, and to make them feel like they can take those steps to report if that's the case, because the way that you handle that disclosure could really help determine how they're going to disclose to people in the future, and if they decide that they're going to take the steps to do something formal with the university. So these are really simple, easy graphics. I call this basic empathy 101. I'm not asking for you all to memorize these or pull them out of your pocket and read them to a friend. Say these things with the compassion of your heart, hopefully, and empathy to people that might disclose things to you, right? I believe you. I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's not your fault. What do you need? And don't dictate the conversation for them. Let them dictate that. Let them have the consent and autonomy to make those decisions themselves. Just be there to help. Anything you want to add, Morgan?
No, I think that's great.
Great.
All right, so now we're going to talk about some resources that you should be aware of if you or someone you know has experienced sexual misconduct. So at the University of Rochester, we have kind of two different buckets of resources. So there's confidential resources and private resources. So we're going to first talk about confidential resources. So these are places where you can go to talk about an instance that you have experienced or that someone you know has experienced, and you can be sure that they are going to hold that information confidentially, really with very, very few exceptions. So the very few exceptions are if they're worried about the imminent health or safety of the person who's making the report or other people. So on campus, the three different places that you can go and be guaranteed that the information you share will be held 100% confidential is University Health Service, the University Counseling Center, and the chaplains at the Interfaith Chapel. And we have the phone numbers for those resources there. And then off campus, we have Restore Sexual Assault Services, which is our local rape crisis organization. We have Willow Domestic Violence Center. There's RAIN, which is a national organization, and the Trevor Project. And their phone numbers are listed on the screen as well. And then in addition to the confidential resources, there's also private resources. So even if there's, so these offices are places where you can go and get information about support and getting connected to resources, understanding information about your rights and your options for addressing the behavior that occurred. So these places will keep your information as private as possible. The only times that we would relay that information would be for the purposes of investigating or seeking a resolution to the situation, and we will share with you when that information is being communicated and to who and for what purpose. So on campus, it's myself, it's the Title IX office staff. There's also deputy Title IX coordinators in each of the schools, and there's a slide coming up which will show you who those folks are. There's the Center for Student Conflict Management, the CARE Network, and the Department of Public Safety. And all of those places will eventually make a report to the Title IX office so that we can make sure that we are getting to you all of the really important information you need about your rights and options. And I really want to emphasize that that's the main reason why these offices and these individuals will report back to the Title IX office, is because we really want to make sure that all students who've experienced sexual misconduct understand the many ways that the university could help to support them. So here's some reasons why you might want to reach out to our office or to me or to the deputy Title IX coordinators. So certainly if you're looking for information or training about university policies or rights, you could reach out to us. To file a complaint or make a report about sexual misconduct involving a student, to let us know about a policy or procedure that could raise potential Title IX concerns, getting information about resources, and again, just any sort of question that you might have about how the university approaches sex or gender-based discrimination, including sexual misconduct. Okay, so your reporting options. This is really important information, and I think that most of you who are listening to this right now are probably thinking this is never going to be something that I need to know about, but the chances are there will be a situation where you or someone you know is going to need this information. So I will encourage you to really pay attention and to think about it. So the very first step in any situation where we learn that a student may have been subjected to sexual misconduct is that person gets an invitation to meet with a Title IX coordinator or someone in our Title IX office. In this meeting, the letter that we'll send out will go through, here are the rights that are available to you, here's your options, and then we'll say, we'd really like to talk to you in more detail about these things if you're willing to do that. If someone says, no, I don't want to talk to anyone about it, we will say, okay, thanks for letting us know that we're always here for you. We don't ever want to force someone to come into a meeting with us. And if someone does choose to meet, then we'll talk about their options for making a report, either to the university or to the outside police. We'll talk about accommodations that are available to them. We have interim measures, things like active avoidance orders, which are something that would prohibit parties from contacting each other. We could also help with orders of protection, things in the outsides, either criminal or family court systems that could help to create some space and safety for people who are involved in dating or domestic violence or experienced some other type of sexual assault. We will help get you connected to mental or physical health support. And you can bring someone with you to any meeting whatsoever with anyone in our office or with any investigators. And it can be whoever you want it to be. So we've had students bring their roommate. We've had students bring their parents. We also have a pool of people who have been trained to support students through the sexual misconduct investigation and adjudication process, and we can always connect students to those folks. If you'd like to have an advisor, but you don't know who that person should be. There is almost always the option to do nothing with the report. So if you can come in and meet with us, and we can share all of your different options, and you can say, no, I'm good. I really don't want to do anything at this point. There is a limited set of circumstances where we do actually need to conduct an investigation. And we would go through those with you so that you were aware. You don't have to share any details about what happened in that meeting with us. You really can come to the meeting and just hear about the general resources and options available. And students can always withdraw their complaint or involvement in the process at any time. We can also help connect you to equal opportunity investigators if you had an experience with a staff or faculty member, which falls under a different policy at the university. And then the little arrows that were in the previous slide that swung around that Tiff had showed, those are to really indicate that these are things that can all happen at the same time. So you can make a criminal report and a university report. You can do an online form, and you can change your mind at any time about those things. All right, so now we're going to talk just briefly about the conduct process. So when a student makes a complaint to the university about sexual misconduct, the investigation is completed by trained investigators. We have people who are very passionate about ensuring that they gather all of the information necessary for the university to make a decision about whether or not our policies were violated. As I mentioned before, you can have someone with you at any point during that investigation process. And we really work very hard to minimize the amount of times that someone has to tell their story, which is why in that initial meeting with someone from the Title IX office, one of the first things we say is, you don't have to tell us the story about what happened. Let us just tell you about what your options are and what your resources are. If you feel like you really have to tell us, or you very much want to tell us the story, you're welcome to do that, but you don't have to, because we know that if someone makes a report, they would have to tell the story again, and we want to minimize that as much as possible. Once if someone does decide to go forward with the report and the investigator meets with the parties who are involved and any witnesses, they gather any sort of documentary evidence, things like sometimes there's text messages or recordings. They'll pull all of that information together and create a formal report, which will then go to the Title IX office for review. This process typically takes about 8 weeks from the time that someone has made a report to the overall outcome of the process, but it could take longer or shorter depending upon the complexity of the report. And then at the University of Rochester, we utilize a hearing process to make a decision about whether or not our policies were violated. We use a preponderance of the evidence standard, which is a more likely than not standard. Another way to think about it is that it's 50% and a feather. So it is a lower standard than the criminal justice system, which uses the beyond a reasonable doubt. It's also lower than the clear and convincing standard, which some schools also utilize in order to adjudicate these cases. We feel really strongly that the preponderance of the evidence standard is the right standard for us to use in making decisions about these cases. The hearing board members in these cases have had extensive training. They are, again, very passionate and dedicated individuals who give their time to this work because they care about it and they think it's important to have a fair and impartial and just process for adjudicating these issues. There's also an appeal process, which is available to both the person who's making the complaint, who we call the complainant, and the person who's being complained about, which we call the respondent. And throughout the process, both the complainant and the respondent have equal rights. The hearing processes that we use are not meant to be a complainant versus the respondent process. They're meant to be a university versus the respondent process. So the hearing is to determine if the respondent violated the policy. And it's really important that we think about it this way because it's not meant to be adversarial. It is not meant to, we don't want the complainant to feel as though it's their responsibility to gather all the evidence and bring forward a case against the respondent. That's the university's job. We may call witnesses in a hearing. The witnesses are there to share the facts that they may know about the incident. And violations of our policy are taken very, very seriously. So there is a range of sanctions which kind of start from, an educational program or project all the way up to permanent removal from the university. So I want to spend just a moment talking about our retaliation policy. Really, it should be called our anti-retaliation policy. It is a really core principle of our student sexual misconduct policy and of the university's approach to addressing allegations of sex-based misconduct. So we want to make sure that everyone knows that we prohibit people from taking any sort of adverse action against a person because of their participation in a complaint or an investigation process. So any type of behavior that would dissuade someone from participating in the process is strictly prohibited. And we have really serious consequences for students who have chosen to engage in retaliation. I think a couple of years ago, we suspended 3 students in 1 year for retaliatory behavior, because we know that it's really critical that people feel free to participate and share the truth about their experiences. And if someone is trying to encourage other people to ostracize them or is telling them they're going to be kicked out of a club or an organization if they serve as a witness, that really undermines the fundamental purpose of our processes.
So kind of switching gears now that we've talked about all of the policy violations and all of the ways in which our conduct process works and how you can get in touch with our office, we want to make it available to all of the students that if you're not really sure where to go to report, we talked about that online reporting form that we have. This can be filled out anonymously, and it is also mobile friendly, so you can utilize this on your mobile devices. The website's listed right below. It's really easy. It's rochester.edu/sexual misconduct, or if you were to go to the search bar on the rochester.edu homepage, you were to type in sexual assault, sexual misconduct, dating violence, domestic violence, etc., you're going to end up landing on our homepage. And right on the homepage, there will be a form that says online form to report about all of those policy violations that we just talked about, and it'll take you right to this form. And this is a secure website where you can go on and fill this out. There are also drop downs that tell you about the form, how it's utilized, how anonymous reporting might be utilized to provide information to our office or for clearly required and mandated reporting. And those will be the things that are marked with a red asterisk. So there will be a couple fields throughout this form that are required for you to fill out. It's usually the date and time of an incident, the location of an incident, and where or what kind of incident may have occurred. And those are things that we are required to collect by law. So other than that, you can fill it out anonymously, or you can fill it out with the information of who may have done the bad behavior, so we can contact that person. You also have an opportunity to drop files at the bottom up to 5 gigs. So if you want to send text messages or Instagram DMs or Snapchats or videos or whatever the case might be, you can add these right along with this form. And I just want to let students know this is a really great way to get this information directly to our office. The 4 of us that I'll show who our team makes up are the only people that receive this form. No other people at the university are receiving this. So it is just our team that gets this information, and then we'll make sure to contact the person who wrote the form, or if they wrote it anonymously, we will take the best steps that we can to follow up on the information that we received. So my job as an educator is to make you aware of all of the wonderful, exciting, great months to get involved with our office, although they are months that are really important for very powerful reasons. Our office does a lot to educate, and usually if we were in person, you'd be seeing events all over campus for October and April. Instead, we're going to try to do those virtually this upcoming year due to some of our sizing limitations with folks being in same spaces on campus. But it doesn't mean you can't get involved, right? So please feel free to reach out to us. I know we've dropped our email address multiple times. I'll say it again. It's title9@rochester.edu. And my individual email address is coming up. I would really be excited to have students get involved with our office and work with us. We don't do just the investigation and adjudication stuff. We also do a ton of education. We work directly with undergraduates, graduates, postdocs, staff and faculty to provide training and provide just opportunities to really have a deeper dive into consent culture and rape culture and victim blaming and badass bystanders. So mark these down on your calendar. How can I know when you're doing a really cool event? Awesome question. Get connected to us on social media. So I always share the Facebook, but as Morgan likes to know, that's probably for us older friends to stay connected with. But we do have a really awesome Instagram page as well, and our handle is really easy. It's at @URTitle9. I always feel very proud when I show this image that we were at 164 followers. We're currently in the 500s. But because we're showing this to our many incoming first-year students, we really hope that you'll go on and drop a follow, mostly because all of our virtual programming and events, maybe some live streaming stuff, will be hosted on social media. Due to the pandemic, we're coming up with different unique ways on how to do virtual events. And those are the best ways to stay connected, to see what's going on, to follow us for events or highlights, are also always on our Instagram page. If you forgot about all those resources or all these things that we've just shared in our short time together, those always live right there on the Instagram or in our Facebook photo albums so that you can get that information. We talked a little bit about our partnership with Restore Sexual Assault Services. We are very lucky to be able to have a university advocate from Restore Sexual Assault Services actually work for the University of Rochester in a sense as an advocate program. So she does not work for the university, but she works with us in tandem. Her name is Jenny Patkin, and she's right there on the left of me in that photo. So her email is there because of working remote and the coronavirus. I don't know if she'll have any physical in-office hours, but the best way to get in contact with her would be to send her an email. The cool thing about Jenny is that she works with anybody who's been subjected to sexual misconduct and can be an advocate through our process. As Morgan had talked about being able to have an advocate or an advisor, she can be an advisor through our process, and she knows the process really well, so she can talk in all those details with those students. And in general, she's also trained to give guidance and support to anybody who's been subjected to any sexual misconduct, or might be a family or a friend of somebody who's been subjected to that and would just like some help on how to have these conversations with that person. So she's a great ally, and we strongly recommend our students to reach out to her if they have any questions. As Morgan had mentioned, we also have 7 Deputy Title IX coordinators. So these are folks that also do the additional work for our office, but are in their own respective schools and also hold their own roles within those respective schools. So as you'll see, we have one for all of our graduate schools as well as Eastman. So John Hain will do Eastman grad and undergrad. And then we have folks for all the rest of the graduate schools. We also have Chris Shanley, who is our Deputy Title IX coordinator for athletics. So if any athletes are coming in and build that relationship with her and want to talk with somebody specific because they have that athletic knowledge, Chris Shanley would be a great resource. For any of our graduate students that are watching this that might feel more comfortable working with one of their graduate Deputy Title IX coordinators, these are the folks that you could reach out to for your respective schools. As I mentioned, we are a small but mighty team, and here we all are, as Morgan and myself had introduced ourselves and our roles. Heather York is our Assistant Director of Investigations, so she also will help meet with students on a first-time basis as well, and then will also work to do investigations if that's the route that the student wishes to take. Christine Federation is our Administrative Assistant, and she is absolutely amazing and does so much for us. So if you have any questions about that online training that we had talked about at the beginning of this presentation, she would be a great person to reach out to, or any other questions about setting up meetings or trainings or opportunities to speak with us, you can always reach out to Christine. And then Rusama Haq is our student employee, who we really hope that we'll get an opportunity to introduce you all to throughout the year. She also will be an RA this year, so I'm sure you might see her around or have an opportunity to virtually connect with her during office hours. But we're very lucky to have her as a student employee working in tandem with our office and also getting to talk to her peers about sexual misconduct awareness, prevention, and all that other stuff. So I mentioned throughout the program here how to contact us. I would say come show up at our really cool, exciting building, Taylor Hall, that nobody could ever find. But unfortunately, it seems as though we might be working remotely for quite some time. So I want to make sure that I really highlight the best way to get in touch with us is our title9@rochester.edu email address. And that inbox is checked during normal business hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We don't check on weekends or holidays, but we will get to you first thing Monday morning if you did send something over the weekend or on a holiday. If you'd like to get in touch with one of us specifically, if you have a specific question about training for myself, or a specific Title IX question for Morgan, or an investigation question for Heather, etc., all of our individual email addresses are down at the bottom. They're usually just our first and last name. And luckily, we all have pretty easy last names to spell, which helps with the email addresses. Christine's is a little different, but if you want to get in touch with us, these are also available on our website. If you scroll down on the main page, you'll be able to see us, and you can click right onto the hyperlink to get our email address. So we just like to wrap it up with some final words. I'll let Morgan jump in real quick, and then I'll wrap us up, and we will be good to go.
Yeah, so we are so excited that you're going to be joining the University of Rochester community. We really hope that you will reach out to us if you have any questions, concerns, suggestions, thoughts. We are really open to your ideas and your feedback for how we can all work together to end sexual misconduct on our campus.
And Morgan just took my words and basically said, our goal here, folks, is to create consent culture, end rape culture, end sexual violence and dating domestic violence, and all of the things that we talked about in our policy. And we really want to partner with our students to be able to do that. We are an office that welcomes questions and ways in which we can collaborate on programs or events. My job is to work for the students for what you need and for what you want. And so please feel free to reach out to us at that Title IX at rochester.edu email address. And congratulations and welcome to the University of Rochester.